While it's long been true that units have lower prices and higher yields than houses, many buyers are unconvinced about capital growth. But today we'll demonstrate how units are outperforming houses on price increases. I'm Terry Ryder and the Property Playbook starts now. The winning trifecta for real estate investors is affordable prices, high rental yields and superior capital growth. And increasingly they're finding that win-win-win situation in attached dwellings, with apartments increasingly topping the charts on capital growth. Today I'm joined by Nuestar Managing Director Michael Wilkins to discuss the latest evidence depicting this compelling trend. Michael Wilkins, welcome.
Thank you, Terry.
Michael, old attitudes seem to die hard. There's still a lot of people out there who still believe that you get the best capital growth with houses on land. It's all deemed to be the land content, but I think you're seeing something very different every day in your work at Nuestar.
Yes, Terry, and I think what we're seeing here is there's definitely a switch towards, with land sizes, they are decreasing. And so the old hat of having this big block of land and a big house is no longer existing. So what's happening there is the land sizes are getting smaller.
Yeah. Now, often when I look at the modern housing estates and the blocks of land are so small and the houses are cheap by gel, I often think people might as well be in an apartment because they're not really getting any land content at all to speak of.
Well, and it's affordability too, because one thing happens when the blocks of land get smaller is that square metre rate starts going up and becoming more expensive. So people are looking at alternatives and what are the options when that land starts getting a little bit smaller, and people are turning towards apartments and other built forms such as townhouses.
Okay, so you're calling it the new paradigm of Australian real estate, the rise and rise of apartments, which is the title of a quarterly report that's published by Nuestar in conjunction with Hotspotting. Obviously, you believe that this trend is here for the long haul.
Yeah, I think the actual living fundamentals have changed. People are demographically doing things differently now. People are working from home, they're looking for more convenience, so things have changed. So what we're seeing now is that they're looking actually for a different type of product to live in. So they want more convenience, they want less maintenance. So apartments are starting really to come to the forefront of people's mindset, especially around the affordability side.
Yeah, but it's more than affordability, isn't it? It's also about perhaps that low maintenance lock up and leave lifestyle, safety and security, a lot of different things driving this rising demand for attached dwellings.
I think the other part too, that's one part, and transport access to good infrastructure as well, and some of these apartments in the boutique sense as well, they're a lot better designed than they previously were. Some of the apartments are a little bit small. Developers now are really going into that design phase. You can see timber flooring, higher ceilings, Miele appliances. So it is really starting to trend towards a more luxurious type of product.
Yeah, but also you mentioned location. I think it's fair to say that apartment buildings tend to be better located than the average house in the suburbs.
Yeah, and I think where the apartments are really suited, it's generally they're suited close to public transport. So you can get out of your apartment, you can, a lot of people don't often have a car either. So you want to be able to walk out of your apartment, walk down to a train or a bus. Particularly in Queensland, we've got 50-cent fares. A lot of apartment dwellings are now on those great transport nodes, and affordability is a factor when it comes to people's spending habits.
Okay, let's talk about some of the research evidence of outperformance by apartments on capital growth. What are the numbers showing?
Yeah, and if you look at it, there were out of 248 suburbs and apartments that the Hotspotting report looked at, over 156 of those areas outperformed housing in apartments. It's a big number. It's nearly 70%. If you look at the Sydney market, of 49 suburbs that we looked at in apartments, again, more than 34 out of those 49 suburbs outperform the median price against housing. So there is definitely a trend.
Yeah, I think the average across the capital cities was that 2/3 of suburbs that have apartment markets and house markets, the apartments were actually outperforming houses on capital growth in the past 12 months. And in some of our cities, I think Brisbane was one of them, Perth and Brisbane, Sydney also, more than 70%. Of instances.
Yeah, and I think those two markets particularly Perth, in the last 2 years, anecdotally we've seen that shift towards owner-occupiers going in there, and also investors into apartments in well-located areas suited for apartments.
Yeah, I was recently looking at some a certain part of the Brisbane market, the Brisbane Northeast precinct, comparing the capital growth in the last 12 months, houses and apartments. Now the houses have shown really solid growth, sort of 8, 9, 10% in the last 12 months. But apartments in the same suburbs were 15, 20, 25%. And we're starting to see numbers like that right across Australia.
I think there's a catch-up too, Terry, because typically people would follow the housing market and follow the numbers through that, and you could see the trend in growth. But what's happening now is there's this catch-up and gap that's coming between that housing, because the housing market has moved along, but the apartment market is becoming a viable option for both investors and owner-occupiers in relation to not just affordability, but for lifestyle convenience.
Yeah. So people who cling to those old attitudes about the land content, often think, well, yeah, certainly houses may have that factor that apartments don't have, but there are some features that apartments have that houses typically don't, such as views, for example, low maintenance. There are a lot of major assets that don't often get talked about that people like about apartments.
I think if you look at apartments, if you look at a typical house, it's a 4-bedroom house. So you've got your bedrooms down one side, your master bedroom and your kitchen. In apartments, you've got a floor plate. And in that floor plate, there is a myriad of different design options, from 80 square metres to 90 square metres, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms, different price points. So it really does give buyers and investors a lot of options in relation to what they can choose, and people are looking for different options now in relation to size and what their demands may be for what they want to live in.
Okay, so who are these people that are driving this trend? So we're seeing the market share of apartments in the major cities of Australia and some of the big regional markets rising and rising. So a greater percentage of the total residential sales in a year are actually attached dwellings. So who are the people who are driving this?
I think the people you're seeing are driving this is two. You've got your owner-occupiers who are downsizing. So you're seeing them coming out of their homes, and they've had a good period of growth, and they're looking at what their options are, and they can look back at it and go, look, I don't need a 4 or 5 bedroom house. I might get a 3 or a 2 bedroom apartment. So that owner-occupier market, or that downsizer market, definitely. In relation to investors, they're looking for yield and value. They want something close, they want something boutique, they want something around infrastructure. Look at Brisbane, you've got the Olympics, Sydney's Western Corridor, you've got the new airport. So people are looking at locations and affordability for that. And I think finally, tenants want convenience. At the end of the day, they want to be able to go, out of their home and either get work easily. So, tenants as well. So I think all 3 sections of the markets are driving this trend towards apartments.
Okay, so speaking of tenants, what about rents? Because we've shown that in terms of capital growth performance, in many instances now, apartments are outperforming houses in many locations, but what about rents?
Yeah, I think you've got the data, Terry. I mean, the vacancy rates have significantly dropped, particularly in apartments, but that's also becoming because there's a lot of owner-occupiers starting to backfill some of these apartments. Typically in the past, where apartments have been really geared towards investors, owner-occupiers are filling up some of this void. And I think with investors, they're seeing value in these buildings and precincts, and they're looking for a longer-term play, but they really do want that infrastructure, employment, and population growth around it. And so that's why they're focusing on those key nodes, because you do get a little bit of height, but where apartments are near transport nodes, but they don't want to also be too far out.
Okay, so you mentioned vacancy rates. In the past, there have been some precincts in Australia apartments where they've been prone to creating oversupply through overdevelopment of big buildings. But I think we've got the opposite problem now. There aren't nearly enough apartment buildings being constructed, partly because the construction costs are so high.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at typically, say, Sydney or New South Wales, the average DA is taking 4 to 5 years in apartments. So what's happening there is there's a stop in that supply coming into the market. So now there's this sort of pent-up demand, but we've also seen that shift in cost as well. So there really is a bit of a crisis out there too in actually the product coming to the ground and people getting, developers actually getting the product to the ground.
Yes, there was a story in Sydney media in the past week about a site in the northern part of Sydney where a developer had been trying for 10 years to get approval to build 1,400 apartments, and they've given up. They've sold the site, and it's going to be turned into industrial because it was just too hard to get the residential product out of the ground. We're seeing rather too much of that around Australia, and that's why we have the shortage, I think.
Yeah, and I think also too, builders are struggling to provide fixed price contracts now as well. So it's hard for a developer to come in and fund these projects effectively. So there is these are some of the economic factors that are actually causing some of these supply issues in apartments.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about Brisbane, particularly inner Brisbane and the Olympics. It seems to me that this is a market that's already thriving, but it's going to be more so. I think the demand that's going to come into that market with that Olympic horizon in 2032 is going to be exceptional. We're going to see big capital growth there.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at any of the Olympic cities globally and where the location of the key infrastructure spend is, it's between the airport and the CBD. And if you look at where Brisbane's located, that the airport and the CBD is only sort of 10 kilometres away. So we're going to see a lot of spend. They've obviously announced the Victoria Park is where the major infrastructure stadium is going to go. So there's a lot of infrastructure coming into Brisbane. So they've got 7 years to deliver it. So there's going to be a lot of construction coming in that area and really exciting projects. Yeah,
there's agreement been reached between the federal government and the Queensland state government on the spending on infrastructure to prepare for the 2032 Olympics, and it's $20 billion to be spent on sporting venues and transport infrastructure, which is a really important factor. That's going to be a massive boost to property markets in Brisbane.
Yeah, and I think we know what happens there is once that infrastructure boom happens, we need employment. And people come to Queensland, what do they need? They need to live somewhere. So this is where we're going to see some really good growth in the apartment market, especially the inner city.
Okay, so just finally, a very quick answer. You talk in the Rise and Rise reports about the fundamentals of a good location. What are those core features?
I think it always comes back to these 3 points: population, infrastructure, and employment. They are the driving metrics around where we see the growth happening. When you've got population, it gives that ability for people to come into the area. The infrastructure then provides what the people want in there. And then once it's provided, the employment comes. Okay. And I think they're the 3 main factors.
Michael Wilkins of Nuestar, thank you for your insights into the new paradigm of real estate, the rise and rise of apartments. That's the play for today. This program has been brought to you by hotspotting.com.au. This is Ticker, and we'll be right back.